Hey everyone, this is Riddhiman. I am an AI solutions architect and a builder. I like to ship things in production and solve problems for enterprises. This is the place where I build out AI architectures out loud, mistakes included, for problems that are prevalent in the industry and all of us are trying to solve as a community. Today, we are going to look at and build an architecture from scratch that serves a copywriting team and generates content for them. So let's get into it. We all have heard that AI is great at generating content, right? And with the prevalence of these tools and applications out there, I am sure anybody who has to generate an email to a blog to a one pager to anything that is required even for their day-to-day life has tried out these applications, right? Now let's cut to the chase into an enterprise setting where there are marketing teams, copywriting teams, sales teams who are trying to reach out to customers. All of these teams are actively trying to use the available tools out there that are trained on a vast corpus of data that generate generic results, right? And they've all given up on that. The problem is that all these tools are very generic in tone. They don't capture the nuances that a particular team would like to have in their messaging or in their assets that they generate, right? So one of the key areas where I want to draw our attention is to the business problem, right? The business problem is that we have a lot of content that is available that we want to transform. We also have the tools available, but those tools don't really do a justice, right? Even after we generate the content, there is a lot of back and forth with those chatbots, and there's a lot of human intervention required, which is of key importance. The human in the loop is of key importance, but the quality and the effort that's required to use these tools often doesn't translate in terms of ROI, right? So we all know that every even mid to small enterprises or small businesses, even small businesses have these subscriptions of let's say ChatGPT or Claude, where their employees are uploading these documents and then asking to rephrase it, check the grammar, add this, remove that, edit those, right? What happens when teams use these tools is that one, each time they do it, they add some or the other nuance in the prompt. Even if you have a prompt library, since the output differs and the perception of the output matters a lot, people make changes, and the final output is not sometimes in line what you would want as a company or as a organization. The second thing is that after generation, like I said, the human in the loop comes into play, and this is where the human adds the actual value. But then, because these tools that exist out there are trained on boatloads of data, right? They are also trained to generate outputs that are very generic. Also, add to the mix that these large language models are they are auto-regressive, right? So the there will be a considerable amount of difference in what employee A or person A gets than what person B gets when they use the same prompt and make the same tweaks, right? There's also no quality signal, so AI will spit out the output, and that's pretty much it. It will not tell you where is it missing in alignment, where is it not capturing the essence of or the voice and tone, right? Okay, so what we need something that first makes sure that it captures the dialect, the voice and tone of your organization. Second, it makes sure that you are not violating any brand guidelines that an organization or a company might have. Third, the output is consistent and repeatable. If someone else uses, the output remains pretty much the same. And then fourth thing is that it also generates a review report. It kind of captures that, okay, you gave me this input, I did this based on your instructions, and this is the final output. And after the human review, it generates a report. So that is what will complete all the pieces of the puzzle. Okay, now let's get into the functional and non-functional requirements. Before I even go and take you to the boxes and arrows of our architecture diagram, it's very important to understand the constraints of what we are building and how do we operate within those constraints and guardrails, right? So setting the guardrail in terms of cost, latency, usage, and what is the expected behavior of the product is really important, and so we'll lay down the foundation over here, right? So on the left we have the functional requirements. The first one being that we will always and only accept a structured JSON object, and this is where your pydantic validation comes in, and it will have the content, the request, the persona, the channel that the user is interested in. And the second functional requirement is supporting multi-channel generation. So, like I said, right, multi-channel, multi-asset. We could do a blog, we could do an email, we could do a social media post that caters to different platforms. Like LinkedIn has a different character limit versus Twitter tweet, or X tweet has a different character limit. The third one is really important, which is to actually make sure that we are keeping the brand voice and tone intact. We also will allow multi-step generation. So after the user uploads their draft and provides all the other inputs, once we generate the content, we want the user to validate it, look at the false flag reports, make edits, and then finalize the content, right? We'll also have evaluation, right? An automated evaluation in any AI product is of utmost importance. If you're not evaluating, not measuring what we are doing, we are not doing justice, and we are just letting AI fly blind over here, which is not something we have to do in an enterprise setting for while developing production grade applications, right? Structured human review will FR7, which is the functional requirement 7. We will also version the prompt and save it, right? So we want the user metadata along with the prompt, along with the instructions, the JSON object, the timing, the final content that we generated, the user edited, and then the final product logged in our tables as well for offline and online evaluation. And then the last one is the feedback loop, right? Feedback of any kind is important. Feedback from the human is of primal importance, because we might have a very sophisticated technical solution, but if the output is not liked by the user and there is no business impact, in the end, I personally believe that there's no point in doing anything like this, right? Now, in terms of the non-functional requirements, that the first one that comes to my mind is latency, right? Over the years, the patience and the attention span of people, thanks to social media, has gone really down, and so we want our applications to be low latent. Since this is a CRUD application, we have to keep in mind. But first, with we do see some amount of latency when token generation exceeds. Of course, we could bring that down with self-hosting your own LLM models rather than using the frontier model via API keys, but we'll touch upon that later. So long story short, we have two kinds of output assets. One is the short form content, which is like social media posts, Twitter posts, and then we have the long form content like blogs or white papers. Those are generally token heavy. So we will do a split over here. For short form, we will keep the P95, which is the 95th percentile of latency, less than 15 seconds, and this will be synchronous. Since generally 15 to 20 seconds, it's fine if the user waits for it. But for long form content, we will be keeping P95 less than 3 minutes, and this will be asynchronous. This is where we will ask the user to, if they want to be notified when the content generation is complete, and we will send them an email of completion as well. In terms of throughput, what we expect is basically 500 assets per month. We are designing this for a small or medium business, right? This is not an enterprise. And if it's enterprise, then there are different teams doing different things, so your usage anyway gets split out, right? So we're planning for 500 assets per month baseline, and 10% of that, which is 50 assets per day, following the burst pattern. Now, the other non-functional requirements are something that we need to pay keen attention over here, right? First is in terms of the brand voice, right? We want that the content that we generate, right, before the human validation, should more than 85% of the content should pass without any human correction, in terms of the brand voice, right? If our system prompts and our overall system is not able to capture the essence of brand voice and tone via the RAG that I will touch upon, or the system prompts, then we are not doing a good job, and there's an area of improvement. Of course, there will be with different people, there's different perception of, okay, no, this sentence should have been this way to capture the brand essence, or we don't use this particular word, or this particular word or bunch of word looks out of the place while writing a blog. And so those kind of edge cases are always going to be there, and that's fine, but we still put the threshold at like 85%, right? There is a 0% tolerance for hallucination. We do not want our system to generate, or in innovate any information about our brand or our products or our campaign, whatever we are trying to capture through the assets we are generating, and that's non-negotiable. So 0% tolerance over there. And then all the other one are general, that goes with any SaaS application, right? So 99.5% uptime, and in terms of cost, we want to limit that, right? So we want to keep less than $2 for long form content. So we will also have to play around with the prompts, or we will then have to think about how do we optimize the inference and move to smaller models with self-hosting or smaller models via API. All right, so let's look at what most teams would initially build, and let's also think from like first principles, all right, when we are building something. Okay, so what we want is we want to generate content. To generate content, we will have some kind of input, right? Those input can be commands, instructions. Some if we think in a marketing copywriting context, then it would be the personas we want to target. It ideally should also consider the brand voice and tone, right? But that's difficult to capture, but we will solve for it as well. And then we have these enterprise applications, frontier models exposed by LLMs or self-deployed models, right? So we have to assemble these pieces together. Get together. Excuse me. So if we don't think about anything and just simply operate, right? What would we do? We would provide the input, right? Input can be text, PDF. Will not think about videos for now in this particular case, but video can also be a valuable input. We will have our own instructions. We will have codified brand guidelines, brand voice and tone, right? We may not have them, and we pass those into a single LLM call, right? LLM, these frontier models will generate some output based on whatever data they have seen, and then the copywriter or the user will copy that somewhere, and then take it, mishmash it into format into the other tool where they want to use it to publish it, right? Now I want you to focus on each of the red boxes over here, which is below these steps that we just outlined, right? So if in step one, right, if we just blanket, like without any thought, we just upload our instructions and text and say, hey, generate this context, there is no place where we are actually capturing the brand voice, right? We might add these guidelines into a system prompt, but then this would differ person to person, right? The second thing is, while we're making the single LLM call, right, there can and there almost always it has hallucinated content, right? The frontier models do not know what your new marketing campaign is about, what's your pricing tier of this new product that you are trying to send an email about to your sales pipeline, right? So no check on hallucination. And then you manually copy, you have to download the result from the Claudes of the world or the chat GPTs of the world, right? There is no integration with the channel, right? So we have to bake in that as well to make it very effective. There is also no human in the loop per se. I mean, technically you can say that, well, while I copy this, I will be editing it and then uploading it somewhere. So yeah, there is a certain aspect, but then again, that's left to the weights of the user, right? And then finally, like I said, right, there is no review gate, right? Nothing that tells that, hey, this is what you uploaded, user. This is what I did. Now can you confirm? And then it passes the final check, right? And most importantly, there is no learning loop, right? So let's say you built the system last month, it made some mistakes, right? If you're not capturing all these things, those are mentioned in the red boxes and designing for those, we will also not capture the mistakes it made, right? So if you don't capture it and there's no learning loop, it might be possible that even last month there was some kind of specific nuanced hallucination happening whenever a product line was mentioned, and this month again, which is the following month, again we would see the same kind of hallucinations or even worse. So in basically the frame 3, what it captures is, this is how we design it from, like, if we don't have to consider anything, reverse engineer it, think in terms of failures, and then build a system that is robust, that captures this is what is expected and this can be failures, these can be the failures. So we build it and put all these building blocks together. Okay, so now let me walk you layer by layer. How do we build this architecture from ground up, keeping all the things that we just discussed in mind, right? And all of the failure modes that we just discussed, we will be covering and designing for that here. I have done this in production. I have made these mistakes, and so I can speak for it with conviction, right? So let me begin, right? So layer one, if you tie back to a couple of minutes prior to this discussion, right, we said that we will only accept a valid JSON, right? That's where your pydantic validations of the world come in. And in that JSON, you know, we want to validate that JSON call even before it hits the LLM API, right? And this is also the place where we have to worry about how to deal with prompt injections, clearly specify the role and everything, right? And so we have to build in use packages like the LLM guard or other validations packages out there that actually checks and validate that the text is not violating any existing rules and the user is not trying to do a supply chain injection or a prompt injection, right? So now coming to the use case, right? What this JSON will have is the instructions from the user, the the CTA, the call to action, right? Because each copywriting message, marketing message, more or less has a clear CTA. It needs to have a clear CTA because the user needs to understand what they have to do with that piece of information. The ideal customer profile, right? The messaging that goes out for I would say for, let's say, someone who is like a CXO versus someone who's like a practitioner or more on the technical side is very different, right? Even for the same campaign. And so feeding this persona or slash ideal customer profile information into in the first step itself is very crucial, right? Before even we come to the review and all that itself, right? Then we have the key messages and the channel, right? So key messages is where you will actually paste the content or upload your source documents or convey that, okay, this marketing campaign is targeting my new chip and so on and so forth. And then the channel is clearing out which particular it will govern what is the output asset type, right? So are we saying the channel is social media LinkedIn or social media Twitter, and then in the process we will bake in these constraints, right? Or if it's a blog or email or things like that. Now moving to layer 2 is actually where the real stuff happens, right? This is where we assemble everything, and that's what I'm calling it as the context assembly layer. So in this layer, what we will do is we will take the user input, validated user input in a valid JSON format that covers the key message, the CTA, the ICP, the persona information, and anything else that the user provides. And we will assemble it with the actual context, right? So what is this actual context? This is basically the brand guidelines that we will store, right, in a vector database, indexed and refreshing with which I'm refreshing it with the source system to keep it up to date, right? We don't want stale brand guidelines governing and controlling our documentation. So like if there is a change in particular product naming, we want that to be captured over here. That also covers and overlaps with the product knowledge base, right? So each company will have a specific series of product lines, product specs, and there are always changes, right? So we need some source as an input into our context assembly that captures these changes and keeps the document up to date. So to give you an example, we cannot just say that our chip, right? The chip will have a specific name that will have its trademark and patented, and it will be patented, legally approved. So we have to use that exact naming convention, right? So all of that we will package with this validated input, plus, like I said, the channel constraints that exist, right? So if giving an example, if we are publishing to social media platform that has a character limit, and the user has asked for that particular channel, we need to make sure that our final generated content follows that, right, along with the persona information. So we have to prompt and we have to feed the information to the LLM to tell that, hey, this message is for a CXO, right? So do not get into the technical weeds, keep it high level, right? Or like, this message is for a practitioner who is into the weeds, so don't skip the technical details, otherwise we will not get the required engagement from them. Layer 3 is actually the generation engine. This is where what we have provided in the layer 1 plus layer 2, that all gets mixed up, and then we hit the LLM API, right? Frontier model in this case, and that can be a self-hosted model also, something local also. So we package the user input, validated that, we brought in our context that matches that validated input, and then we are passing that to the generation engine, which is essentially hitting the LLM API along with all of these inputs, right? Validated inputs. And then the key part over here is what most teams miss, and even I missed for a couple of iterations, was not building a self-critique loop, right? So LLMs, and everyone who's listening to this has probably heard the term LLM as a judge, and and most of the critiques out there will say, oh, LLM as a judge does not work. But where it definitely works, and I have seen it in production, is that LLMs are great to critique the content generated, right? And how we went one step ahead was to actually use another API, another model to validate the generated content, right? So if we are using Gemini 2.5 Flash, we would use, let's say, OpenAI GPT 4.0 to validate that, not keeping the same model and the same context, right? So because we observed a lot of differences when we were using the same model with the same history and context of that model to validate that. So this is a design consideration that we kept in mind, and it gave us a lot of, it paid us a lot of dividends down the line. So we built a self-critique loop. So the another model critiques the generated output, and then it gives the first model an input on the points it feels that it's still lacking based on the user requirements and the context, right? And so the first model that generated the first draft, it rewrites it based on the suggestions that it got from the second model. And this is actually hyperparameter. You can say, oh, how many passes do we need? 1, 2, 3. Now it all depends on what kind of asset you are generating, right? If you are generating a 150 token word email, right, generally 1 or 2 passes are more than enough. But if you are generating, let's say, a 10,000 word blog, then you will definitely need more passes. And then even in those passes, you will have to specifically prompt areas to highlight, right? Like first call will only specifically look at this thing, or like you will have to come up with a scoring rubric in that case if the output is consistent. But for short form content like LinkedIn or email, 1 or 2 passes are more than enough, right? Then layer 4 is the actual piece where we have set the guardrails and the evaluation piece. This is where we check that even after doing these loops, right, are we meeting the brand guidelines or not? Is there any hallucination or not? Are we meeting the channel compliance? So channel compliance, like, oh, you cannot use emojis, right? Some channels have that you can only have 150 characters for this kind of post. So are we meeting that? Is the CTA clear? Are we clear with the CTA? So we don't want to send an email or make a social media post without a clear call to action. That goes against the first principles in marketing or like copywriting, right? So is the content relevant to the persona? Now this is an additional check, right? So the first check happened from another model, but now we are again in layer 4 baking that, right? And we are capturing the results over here along with scores, right? So that is an important design principle that we learned after making a couple of mistakes. And once all these happen, we evaluate that, we generate a report, then we put it in front of the subject matter expert or the human in the loop, right? And so even after this, after going through the critique, self critique, then critique by another model, and then by the human, that's the point when the actual content lands in the hands of the human in the loop. And again, the human has the ability to edit the content. But the main thing to understand over here is now the human is actually doing what they are supposed to do, which is their human expertise in copywriting. They are not checking for grammar, they are not checking for the brand voice and tone, they are checking for editorial accuracy, right? That is something only a copywriter working in a particular company or organization with certain years of experience under their belt can know. No AI that is trained on like boatloads of corpus of data, or even if you fine tune a model, it is very difficult to match that level of human expertise and copywriting expertise. So layer 5 is where the actual human reviews the output. They act and reviews it with editorial expertise, right? For with their editorial expertise, they don't proofread it or check grammar or things like that. They are looking for, oh, okay, is the message really aligning and capturing everything what this new campaign that the AI has never seen, or not, right? And the last layer is the feedback loop. So after every output, what we do is through our application we get users feedback, right? And so we also capture what was finally published, right, or finally downloaded by the user. So in a lot of cases the user may not choose to directly publish it to a channel because they still need other reviews, so they just download it. So in that case we capture what did we generate, what did the user download, what edits did the user make, and then we also have qualitative metrics like thumbs up, thumbs down, or oftentimes when we do A/B testing, we also pop up Likert scale. So like how was your experience today? What was the quality of the document or assets generated on a scale of 1 to 5? Right. So, and the last thing that I will point out is if you look at the dotted line, which is this feedback signal, right? If we don't improve based on the user signal, right? If we don't iterate on our system prompts, don't iterate on parts of our context assembly, right, we will again make the same mistake. So it's extremely important to capture layer 6, right, and build layer 6 into your system so that these outputs from the actual users of the application flows back into layer 1 where we make sure that okay, when we build the brief, right, and that goes into the content assembly part, we are capturing all this, so the feedback actually flows into layer 1 and layer 2, which is extremely important. Now let us zoom in into the whole context assembly part, which was our layer two, right? So if we have to recap, the first thing that was coming into the context, the overall context in layer two before that gets passed to the LLM API or the frontier model or self-hosted model, is the input from user in JSON format, which is validated, right? And also following all the guardrails, all the precautions for prompt injection, for other malicious intent that might come through our application. But most importantly, I want you to pay attention over here on these four things on the left hand side. The first one is brand voice specification, right? So in our enterprise use case that I worked upon, we had those coming from DAM, right? So we had those coming from a dam, and all of those assets, right, or those guidelines, brand guidelines, were stored as assets in that dam. And so we had an API connection, and what we had built was a close to real time pipeline that would capture any changes, any updates in those assets, and then rebuild the whole um, corpus and then index that in a vector database, right? That would feed our RAG. The second thing and the most important thing is, again, all these things are more geared towards, since there are a lot of changes and we need to make sure that we capture everything. They are for a RAG based setup, right? Is the product knowledge base, right? So products, they get updated all the time. Product specs, product naming conventions, new product line services gets added. So we need to capture that as well, so that that gets translated into the final document, and that's also used during the validation part as well, right? So that's there. Then the third thing is the channel constraints. So the user in their brief will pass what is the expected output, right? So do they want an email? So in that case, the general constraint is that it should be less than 200 words. Do they want a social media post for LinkedIn? In that case, the it would be like less than 80 words. I'm just giving an example, right? Or if it's a tweet, then less than 230 tokens. Or if it's for some other martech tag integration, like Gong or something like that, then that would have its own character limit, right? And the fourth thing is the persona context, right? So the user brief will say that okay, this message is for a CXO or for a practitioner or for a decision maker or someone on the buying committee, right? So we need to have some kind of documentation and mapping that says that okay, if it's a CXO, then this is the ideal customer profile, this is what a CXO is, and these are the things that you need to keep in mind while generating assets, right? So you have to be high level, you have to be careful of your time, of their time, you have to keep the word count limited, not be too technical, not be too informal, not share too much, right? Versus like if you are talking to or if you're going to send that generated content to someone who is a practitioner, then in that case, and a technical person, and your company is into like product lines that are very technically heavy, like let's say GPUs, right? And you are talking to someone who is on the buying committee and who's going to make a procurement decision for your target company, right? In that case, then you have to be on your toes and give all the technical specifications. Otherwise, that's of not much use. Or even if it's difficult to capture in the constraints, then you have to provide them a link to the white paper or the product spec, so that it's right there. You are meeting the customer where they are, and then through your asset, and they can go and review everything what's needed. This is not generally what you would do when messaging or trying to generate assets for a C-level person, right? So now what we have done, and I kept a separate section for this, is specifically because I wanted to describe how do all these contexts get assembled into our architecture, right? So having it in one layer is one thing, but it's very important that we design it in such a way that we keep these different inputs isolated and build failure and exceptions and everything, try to catch exceptions in these separate things even well before we hit the LLM API or wherever, like make the call to the large language model. Okay, so now let us look at the layer 3, right? I think it was layer 3. Okay, so now let us look at layer 3. I just made sure that it was layer 3, and then I wanted to focus on how we will go about it, right? So step 1 is outline, and outline is only needed for like long form content only, right? If it's a short form content like a social media post or email, you don't really need an outline. So step 1 is only for if it's detected that the user requires a long form content. Uh, So we hit step one. If not, then we directly go to step two, which is the draft full generation, right? So and again, this will be pre-fed into the prompts, right? And then after the draft is generated, the important step that we just discussed was the self-critique part, right? Where a second LLM call will be made to ideally to a different LLM provider that will look at the output that's generated, right, based on the factors that we have provided, based on the guidelines that we have provided, inserted in the context assembly part, right, and then come up with a report, right. It will do kind of a self critique, but not really a self critique, but ideally a second model looking into that, and then the first model will take that feedback and revise in step 4, right. Like I said, based on the 3 content types that we are focusing, generally one pass is more than enough. If it's required based on your use case, based on like the content that you are generating on your inputs into the context assembly, you might require more passes, right. And then what happens after this revision part is, right, if it still fails, right, it internally flags the prompt for a review, right. It still gives the output to the user, but in our internal evaluation, we get the first signal that, hey, the second LLM after doing this critique is calling the output a little weaker. This is essentially important because all these models and all the outputs, all the weights and the outputs, right, they drift. So there is a data drift that happens continuously, and it's very important that we need to capture this. And we have seen that after a few months, the setup is in production, we start seeing the second LLM call making these kind of flags. We see an increase in these kind of flags, right. And then if it passes, again the output is given to the user, but and then everything is logged in with evals and guardrails, right. So with the whole scoring that we got through the rubric that the second LLM model did, we store that in the eval and our logging. Now let us look at what happens after the content is generated, right. So until now, what has happened as a recap is we passed in the validated user input, we passed in those 4 things into our context assembly, right, the product specs, the brand guidelines, the channel constraints, and the ICP, the persona information, right, all the other stuff, the key messages from the user. We made a LLM call, the LLM, and then within that LLM call there is a critique aspect as well. So another LLM call reviews the output of the first LLM call, comes up with a report, gives an opportunity to the first LLM call to review and make adjustments, right. And so this is where the generated content journey happens. So I just wanted to specifically recap this, right. So what all is checked, right. First is brand voice. So the LLM as a judge, like I mentioned, that will again check even after us referring to this piece in the context assembly, that will be checked. The hallucination will be checked, that are we not are there any avenues where we are hallucinating, are we making any false claims, and so, or whatever claims that we are making matches exactly either from the user input or from the knowledge base, right. And then also the channel rules, right. So if the user is asking for a social media post that requires to be less than 150 characters based on our guidelines, we need to follow that. We cannot generate a 10,000 word blog for that, or give an output to the user which is of like 2,000 words and ask them to use it as a social media post, right. Then there is CTA clarity. So if you remember in the brief, right, user also passes a CTA, and as per the rule of copywriting, every clear message should have a clear CTA, otherwise that's really we're not doing justice. So again, the second LLM model, when it does the self critique as well, and all the important thing is that the same factors, right, if we didn't have the LLM, right, so like persona relevance or anything like that, if we didn't have the LLM, then all this will have had to be done by the user, right. And that will slow down the whole content generation distribution pipeline by a lot. So this is where actually the power of AI comes, with the right set of guidelines and guardrails, right. And then once everything is done, then we come to the routing decision, like I told you, right. So what the model will do is it will aggregate all the scores based on the scoring rubric that we have done, right. And then if it passes, then it goes into the review queue to the human in the loop, right. If it fails, then what it does, it flags the review and tries to redo it, and then after one pass gives that to the user. And then if it scores abnormally low, then which is like a threshold, like let's say if you have 5 points for each, so out of 25, if it scores less than 5, right, or less than 10, whatever threshold you decide, out of 25, in that case, it those are like those extreme cases where we have to say, and the system should auto detect that something is grossly wrong and we should not share the output with the user. So in that case, we will send out a pre-planned error message to the user that, hey, because of some reasons, or because of internal service error or something like that, but then we have to translate that to the user that something is wrong on our side, and we will get back to you. And then we will also have to log this separately, because we will have to redo the request, right. So this is the entire journey of the pipeline. This is how the entire architecture is. So right from the fact that the user uploaded, to the context assembly, to the self critique, to the evaluation, and to the point that what happens after the generated content, right? We land over here, and then after this only two things remain. One is like extensive logging. We have done the evals part, we have to log the evals as well, and then extensive logging on, okay, what all the user metadata, what was the user, from where did they log in, their user id, their ip, the time taken for request, latency, what did they download, what did we generate, what did they flag, was it a thumbs up or thumbs down, how many iterations did the request pass in the first generation itself, like when, like in the self critique we didn't have to do another pass. All those things need to be logged, and wherever the system is failing we need to capture those specifically, so the next time when we version the prompt, right, and we push the new iteration, new version of the code, we need to keep these feedback in mind. Then only we have a product that is really improving, otherwise we'll keep on making the same mistakes. So with that, that completes the full architecture, right? We started from the scratch, and the way we built it was right from the first principles. We said, okay, what is that we will do directly without giving any thought, and then reverse engineer with what are the failures that come across. For the last segment, I wanted to touch upon a few things that even after building a very robust architecture, builders like me, architects like me, run into these kind of problems, and that's where actually the real fun lies, right? Of doing stuff where you actually get into the trenches and learn a thing or two. So I've captured four problems that will arrive, and that's when you need the support of the SMEs, the support of the actual business users to solve these kind of issues, right? So the first one is, I particularly observed that brand voice, right? And the voice and tone is hard, right? And it's hard to capture because that's very subjective, right? Because the kind of guidelines we get for voice and tone while generating content is that, oh, you should use plain simple English, you should be direct, you should be grounded in truth, you should give stats and data, and you should not be pretentious, or you should not be wisecracking, right? You should be witty but not wisecracking. And so that's the kind of stuff which is very hard even for a human to like understand and translate into the content that they would generate, leave aside LLM, right? Even if you build a robust systems like that. And so the way we try to mitigate it is to give lots of examples, right? Lots of few short examples, good bad pairs. So like, if we give a guideline that, hey, be witty, right, but don't be overbearing, or don't appear to be very confident, or like making fun of the competitors or things like that. In that case, we provide examples, few shots of good or bad, right? The other thing, which we spent a lot of time, and even sometimes stuff goes wrong, is the knowledge base, right? The product knowledge base, that gets updated all the time. And one of the challenges that I have seen is that with acquisitions, right, those are generally secret. And so for a good chunk of time, you don't have you don't know the future, because those are kept secret because of like shareholder and all those kind of restrictions. So in that case, it so happens that because those are secret, we keep on using the stale guidelines, only to be later then flagged that, oh, any content related that covers this product line should not go out, or should not be published or hit our tech stack, because an acquisition happened or something like that. And then we have to redo the product knowledge base, so wait for the new mapping, wait for approval. So that is like the bureaucratic problems that we run into, and those are bound to happen, right? Problem three is something that I also touched upon while explanation, is the eval calibration drifts. So with time, like if we don't make any changes, we clearly see that the quality deteriorates, right? And when I say quality deteriorates, what is the way to identify that is that second model that does the critique of the first model, right? So a lot of times we would see that the second model was flagging stuff, and we detected that, but then overall it was still passing the threshold, and we were showing the output to the user. And the way we caught it was that we started getting lots of thumbs down. And so when we were investigating, we saw that, oh wow, what is the reason we are getting a lot of thumbs down, despite us crossing the threshold of the safety, right? And that's when we saw that, oh, the model is drifting. And so in that case, we decided to switch to like a higher model, right? One with more reasoning capacity. We were initially using a lighter model, right? Or like a lot of times we've also observed the opposite. So there's no like hard and fast rule, but generally a model change coupled with a prompt change has worked for us, right? And then problem four is, which we have seen, is that a lot of times user really don't do justice. They are like they give thumbs down even when the output was really good, and so that kind of confuses us a lot. And then they give thumbs up even when the output was not really that good, and like it barely crossed the threshold. So we have to take that with a pinch of salt. But I would really like to thank all the business partners that I get to work with. And this is again the area where human in the loop, right? Why domain expertise is important. So we can build all these systems, and but until and unless those are actually validated by humans and being used right to drive value, these AI systems collapse, right? So with that, we complete our architecture for the content generation platform. I hope you liked this, and happy to discuss this if there are any other ideas, any experiences that you would like to contribute. Thank you.